Let's explore. Oopsie, I'm on the wrong button. That did not turn out right. Well, we're starting off with a bang, aren't we, folks? Let's see, I'm hitting button number 5, and that does not seem to be behaving itself, so let's go over here and try that. Phew! Alright. We're having it's going to be a hot time in the old town tonight, as Jack Nicholson as the Joker promised us. So let's explore how to navigate a dark night of the soul. This morning's lesson is drawn from a good-hearted question found on Reddit. The individual wrote, "My ego habits have gotten very bad. That's because I'm becoming more aware. So it's not my job to throw feces at this individual, but it is my job to do what I can to help this individual not step in the gaping bear trap that has been set before him by societal norms." So the first dangerous societal norm is bizarro labeling. Ego comes to us from the Greek, meaning self, but it was popularized by a Viennese cokehead in the 1800s. What could possibly go wrong with that? And the way Sigmund Freud referred to self was in a positive way. He said we had an id, an ego, a superego, which basically means we had a really petulant, childish, selfish, narcissistic set of impulses. And then on the other extreme, we had completely altruistic impulses. And then in the middle, we had a mediator trying to make the most of survival needs and altruism. So from the Freudian model, that was fine. But somehow over the years, over the decades, ego and id's roles have been reversed. And then stupid white men got their grubby paws on Buddhist scriptures and just went to town with them, talking about beliefs and elements of faith, things that the Buddha never touched on. When the Buddha talked about not self, he was not saying, here's something you must believe in, here's something you must disbelieve in. He said, basically, our idea, we have a tendency to grasp at everything, including our sense of self. Let's explore how this is kind of silly and not really useful. So that's it. We took just one minor discourse on the subject and ran amok. So, when we start blaming our dark impulses on a section of our brain, a section of our mind, and adhere a label to it, we are going to create a circumstance where we are more likely to disassociate from it, attempt to disassociate from it, attempt to ignore it. Now, the first of the 7 enlightenment factors is mindfulness. So if we do that, we're going to wind up with a very dissatisfying analog of a meditation practice. Number 2, my ego habits have gotten very bad. That's because I'm becoming more aware. So there is a peril of certitude. A phenomenon has been observed in academia. The further away someone is from the cutting edge of science, the more certain they tend to be. However, the closer someone is to the cutting edge of science, the least certain they can be. And we can see this reflected in the cognitive bias described as the Dunning-Kruger effect, whereas a complete idiot is certain of his competence, and those who are profoundly competent are not certain of their competence. That's not because they have weak self-esteem. That is because if you're a physicist working at CERN, even though you have a PhD, you are seeing just more information than you ever have before. You're seeing more changes to preconceptions than you ever imagined, and more new information than you ever dreamt of. And before that, the only rational response is one of vulnerability and saying, wow, I might have been the smartest person in my 7th grade physics class, but now I'm just a fool with a stellar vocabulary. And there's so much I don't know. And that's a healthy, natural, normal response. Contrast that with if you will, with the worst case of a high school physics teacher who is just steeped in rigidity and certitude, and his mind is like, as Robin Williams said, boom, sorry, we're closed. So Robin Williams said that in his HBO special way back in the 70s. So this is going to sound picayune, but for our own happiness, for our own well-being, we have to be flexible in our language. The more flexible we are with our language, the more flexible we could be with our mind. That might sound superstitious, but bear me out. So instead of saying, my ego habits have gotten very bad, that's because I'm becoming more aware. We could say, I'm experiencing greater petulance. And I'm wondering if that could be correlated to my mindfulness practice. One is more vulnerable and more flexible, and the other is more rigid and self-protecting. Always choose vulnerability and flexibility. Think of it this way. About 100 years before the advent of the Buddha, old Lao Tzu in China either composed or compiled the 81 poems of the Tao Te Ching. A careful analysis of them will reveal that not only does the Tao Te Ching delineate between which attributes are yang and which are yin, but, contrary to the ravings of stupid white men, they actually endorse yin. One of the basic message, the basic thrust of the Tao Te Ching is always choose yin. The American billionaire Elon Musk said, always keep thrusting. The Tao Te Ching says, always choose yin. So rather than indulging our tendencies to be rigid, fearful, controlling, elitist, cryptic, competitive, and even cruel, let us choose the unpopular path of being flexible, loving, laid back, egalitarian, lucid, cooperative, and kind. This is far, far more than just a communication style. For I assure you, I have not the chutzpah to ask you to merely polish a turd. This is integral to, at last, accessing the neurology that we've already been born with. Accessing our birthright. Our opportunity to at last become the person that our dogs already think we are. Good morning, James. Thank you so much for the generous gift. To you I send a psychic hug. So let's continue. I haven't found a satisfactory explanation of the dark night of the soul, neither in writing nor in video. While I applaud the diligence of your search, let's continue. In fact, there's only one thing I'm curious about, and I can't find the answer to it. Darkly ironic, is it not? When we are in the dark night of the soul, are we not aware of the moment? Question mark. Most of the sources I've looked at say to surrender, not to fight the ego. So I'll get to your question in a moment. Does that mean, well, I've always learned not to ignore James's questions. He's terribly smart. So James wrote, if you say, pardon my ego, before you say something egotistically as you get closer to ego death, but seriously, folks. The irony is delicious, is it not? So ego death is once again something the Buddha did not talk about. Ego death is terrible. Ego death is the death of mindfulness. So let us explore mindfulness for a moment. Due to the sympathetic nervous system ensconced within the thoracic region of our spinal cord, we are wired to notice things vulnerably, passively, viscerally, randomly, and distinctly uncomfortably. We are wired to notice sights, sounds, sensations, flavors, scents, and the like, but we are also wired to notice emotions, intentions, thoughts, memories, and imaginings. The illusion of an ego death means that part of us is no longer being noticed. Part of our brain that is still there, that is still showing up in electroencephalograms and functional magnetic resonance imaging is not registering in our mindfulness. That is not good, for we have evolved to notice the external, the internal, the physical, the mental, the pleasurable, the painful, the interesting, the boring, the glorious, and the grotesque. As a child, I don't know about you, but I was a consummate coward. I was a consummate coward. From hiding from the monsters in the closet or under the bed by cunningly pulling the covers over my head as if to say, ha ha ha, now you can't see me because I can see you. That reminds me of good old Stephen Colbert when he had his TV show, The Colbert Report, and he said, "This just in, world hunger is over because my tummy's full." So, let us avoid the pseudo-intellectualism of even using the word ego, unless, of course, we're in a Greek class or we're discussing Freudian psychology, which really should be called Freudian metaphysics, for it is not bound in experimental data. But anyway, let's continue. So, the author of this question continues. When we are in the dark night of the soul, are we not to be aware of the moment? For most of the sources I've looked at say to surrender, not to find the ego. Does that mean when we are in the dark night of the soul, we can't be in those levels of consciousness, third, observing thoughts, and fourth, being in the moment? So clearly this guy's done a lot of reading, and he's slipped into a rather rigid system. I respect this individual's intellectual enthusiasm. This individual's put the time and effort in, and I respect that. But in the words of Shakespeare, he's about to paraphrase Shakespeare, he's about to be hoist on his own petard. To paraphrase the book of Acts in the Christian New Testament, Paul, Saul, you've been driven mad by your great learning. We must avoid that. We must recognize. I have to remember what good old the Chan teaching that Bruce Lee referenced in Enter the Dragon. It is like a finger pointing at the moon. Smack! Do not focus on the finger, lest you miss that heavenly beauty. Bruce Lee. So often in our enthusiasm, we cling with white-knuckle intensity onto a teaching or a book or a set of books, and with such ferocity that we lose the forest from the trees. Jesus encountered the same confusion in the Gospels when he said, no, I'm paraphrasing horribly, no. Man was not made for the Sabbath was made for man. And then again when he explained, do not pour new wine into old wineskins, lest the old wineskin burst and the new wine be lost. Pour new wine into new wineskins. The Pharisees' problem was not a lack of faith. It was an excess of faith. It was an excess of belief, an excess of rigidity, an excess of certitude. So let us let go. Do I just watch my ego? So this person is suffering greatly, despite this person's very good heart and very sharp mind. They're suffering because they've been given misinformation. seldom deliberately, often through really lazy and vague and imprecise communication. Let's see if we can't fix that. We're going to begin with broad brushstrokes. So we've discussed the peril of labels and the peril of assumptions and the peril of disassociation and the peril of choosing our emotions. Let's go here. So in my enthusiasm, I used to think, because I had fallen under the sway of people like Bender and Grinder and Robbins, that you could choose your emotions. Doing so is terrible. There is a prominent self-help teacher whose voice is always hoarse. His voice is always hoarse. Why is it hoarse? Because literally, by his own confession, he sits in his car and screams affirmations until he feels what he wants to feel. What a waste of time and energy. That's not sustainable. Buddha did not say, here's the path of freedom, you are now a slave to your emotional preferences. Enjoy. No. What is the liberation the Buddha offers us? Is it liberation from the presence of ugly emotions? Or is it liberation from their tyranny? I would say to you that the overall context of the Buddha's teachings indicates that it is that from the tyranny of our unpleasant emotions that we are to be liberated. So let's explore how mindfulness works. Every time we inhale, thanks to our sympathetic nervous system ensconced within the thoracic region of our spinal cord, we're wired to notice. Vulnerably, passively, viscerally, and randomly. We can notice inert things, like sights, sounds, sensations, flavors, scents, and the like. We can notice things that carry with them a stigma. Our emotions, intentions, thoughts, memories, and imaginings. We can notice things that we would rather sometimes ignore. The external, the internal, the physical, the mental, the pleasurable, the painful, the interesting, the boring, the glorious, and the grotesque. But what are we to do with that which we noticed? Every time we exhale, whether we know it or not, whether we feel it or not, whether we intend to or not, every time we exhale, we access our parasympathetic nervous system, ensconced within both the lower lumbar region of our spinal cord as well as the tippy top of the cervical region of our spinal cord. And this bad boy is wired to support both physical relaxation as well as mental release. So yes, during our inhalation, we get to just be completely vulnerable to the petulant demands of our darker impulses. But during each exhalation, we are already wired to physically relax and mentally release that which we noticed during the previous inhalation, as if that which we noticed had become, at least momentarily, at least fleetingly, as non-graspable as a vast empty void, like the illusion of the infinite azure sky on a bright and beautiful cloudless morn, which, although compelling to the eye, is rather non-graspable to the hand. So we're not told to disbelieve in a perception. We're not told to believe in emptiness. We're told to embrace the full spectrum of perception. Perception that is incoming perception and outgoing perception. Perception and release, awareness and release. These things are as natural as inhalation and exhalation, but we get in our own way. Consider, if you will, our brain, the 3-pound squishy supercomputer forever in the dark. It's kind of like Urkel on Family Matters, isn't he? Or she? Just always, benign yet odious. You do that? Here's the great irony. Our inner Urkel is not malicious. He's eager to help. When we say, hey, inner Urkel, silently and mentally recite the demonstrative pronoun this during each inhalation. And oh yeah, by the way, silently and mentally recite the one-syllable verb ease during each exhalation. All of a sudden, this ungainly, chaotic Tasmanian devil from a Bugs Bunny cartoon that is our brain begins to harmonize with our autonomic nervous system. Not only harmonize, but cooperate with it. And that is the magic of meditation. What is the dark night of the soul? At long last, the scales have fallen from our eyes, and we perceive the circumstantial, the physical, the interpersonal, and the mental with greater clarity and vulnerability than heretofore imagined. And most of us are just not ready for that. Most of us have not been taught the actual mechanism to deal with that, which is that during every exhalation, we get to take a metaphoric mental margarita. We get to access mental release through the body's physical relaxation, which need not ever be forced, for it is already latent within every out-breath. When a typical person, when a muggle experiences the dark night of the soul, it's because circumstances have finally caused his assumptions that were spoon-fed him by society to shatter. When a contemplative experiences the dark night of the soul, it is because it is an indictment not against the contemplative, but against the contemplative's teachers, direct or indirect, living or dead. Few of them were malicious, most of them meant well, but you can mean well and still be dead wrong. A dark night of the soul is not an indictment against the person seeking the path of mindfulness and meditation. It is an indictment, however, upon the assumptions and techniques they have been taught. And it is the opportunity to discover new techniques that work better. And to paraphrase our friend Peter Cross, portrayed by a wonderful actor whose name eludes me, from got his start on Saturday Night Live, Bill Murray. In the words of Peter Cross, played by Bill Murray in the movie, the wonderful movie, Richard Donner movie, Scrooged. We all have some difficult nights. We all have nights where, for physiological purposes or circumstantial purposes, we are less resourceful than ever before. I have a dark night of the soul every winter time when Christmas gets close. And I have to process it by doing walking meditation, which is very, very a useful tool for those suffering from PTSD or CPTSD. We all have things that can throw a wrench in the machine of our spiritual practice. What separates the men from the boys and the women from the girls is not the presence or absence of the protracted or acute dark nights of the soul, but what we do with them. I do look forward to exploring finer details of the Buddhist path with you, as well as chanting and meditating with you after approximately 30 seconds of housekeeping. This is Lama Jigme Gyatso of the Buddha Joy Meditation School. For more than 30 years, I've spent about 8 hours a day, almost every day, studying, practicing, mastering, and reverse engineering the teachings and techniques of each sect of Buddhism so that you would not have to. Welcome, my friends, to Meditate Like a Jedi, which is made possible due to the generosity of viewers just like you. Ooh, did I push the wrong button? I guess I did. Boy, don't I feel like a poop head. So let's go over here. Okay. By the way, James, I love your reference to the weary stand-up comic from the 1950s. But seriously, folks. Sir, I think you are an intellectual giant, despite what Rose says about you. I forgot. One of your cats is named Rue, and the other one is named what? I forgot. Remind me. Let us begin this morning's practice with a bit of the old bliss and letting go, known colloquially as calling the teacher as from afar. Together, let's chant. By the way, I guess I would be remiss if I did not tell you that kind gaze is known in Sanskrit as Avalokiteshvara and in Tibet as Chenrei Zig. Those with the misfortune of traversing the path of being rigid, fearful, and controlling slip into the superstition of viewing kind gaze as an entity to be worshipped and supplicated. However, those with the good fortune to fall into the path of being flexible, loving, and laid back view kind gaze as just an archetype whose iconography reminds us that we are already wired to master, no less practice, awareness and letting go, love and letting go, as well as bliss and letting go. All of which we're going to practice this morning. Please chant with me. Oh, yes. So here, Pema Zhungne represents our enlightened potential. And Chenrei Zig represents literally sensations, the blissful sensations we could feel at the crown of our head, and figuratively the teacher or the teachings, or both. Please chant with me. Let us invite real or imagined Guru Avalokiteshvara to the crown of our head, that in the union of bliss and letting go we may train. As we breathe in, please silently and mentally recite the first half of the supplication, Lama, come. During the exhalation, let us silently and mentally recite the second half of the supplication, to this crown. And let us remember that this supplication is metaphorical. Now, I find it useful to count the 4 repetitions of this exercise, of this rather passive contemplation, upon the creases and tip of my left little finger. I like to advance my left thumb during each inhalation. Please practice with me. So I'd like to rest my hands, one upon the other, palms up, in my lap, in harmony with my center line. But I lift my hand up before the camera for the sake of providing you an illustration. During our inhalation, let us silently and mentally recite the demonstrative pronoun this. During our exhalation, let us silently and mentally recite the one-syllable verb is. Let us do this for 12 times and continue our counting upon our left ring finger. And that is just how simple the path is. From a certain point of view, we could explore the outer set of preliminary practices together. Let us courageously exercise even our ability to notice other stress, that the seeds of empathy we may sow. Now for our next 12 exercises, let's replace, just temporarily replace the demonstrative pronoun this with the adjective tal, reminding us that during every inhalation, whether we know it or not, whether we feel it or not, whether we wish it or not, we are already wired to generate a vertical traction between our tush and our head. This Ted was a marvelous set of movies. I love how the actor, what's his face, Mark Wahlberg, went to some places of great self-deprecation when in the sequel. In the sequel, where Ted was scolding his human, who I forgot Mark Wahlberg's character's name, when he was scolding Mark Wahlberg's character and saying, "There are no such things as chicks with dicks. There is just men with breasts." And to which Mark Wahlberg was like, I know. It was chef's kiss. Chef's kiss. Together. Instead of torturing ourselves with a fear of karma, may we view interdependence as the opportunity for our love to lighten the loads of others. And now for the remainder of this morning's live stream, let us return to this is. Having climbed a contemplative cruising altitude together as a team, let us meditate as transformatively as Obi-Wan Kenobi upon the toasty sands of Tatooine under the guidance of the Force Ghost of Qui-Gon Jinn. Rather than torment ourselves with the dread of death, may we view how ever-changing one and all there is nothing permanent to grasp. Two types of men of a certain age. One says, there is no change, there is no change, there is no change. Everything is exactly the same as when I was a little boy. And the other says, well, there's change all around, but I guess it makes life more interesting. And for those of us who want to do the right thing and say the right thing and feel the right thing, the ever-changing nature of language and morality and acceptance and gender identity is exciting, because we get to learn better and better and better ways of making people feel loved and respected and seen and valued and safe. And that's so much better than monotony and boredom and cruelty, don't you think? Instead of neurotic... Ooh, question. So, Paul Soriano Formigon, forgive me if I've mispronounced your name. Is it true, but I am overwhelmed with so much uncertainty nowadays? No worries. So... when you say, I'm sorry, pronouns make me extra stupid. So when you say, is it true, can you elaborate the pronoun and tell me what you are questioning, is whether it's true or not? I apologize, I'm not trying to be picky. That's just the nature of my brain damage. Together. Instead of neurotically straining to make the most of each precious meditation opportunity, wicked simply flow from mindfulness and meditations, generation of scented spontaneity. Oh, yes. So, the nature of language... Well, let me just finish this real quick. Okay, so the nature of... Ask a linguist, and they will tell you. Despite the tight asses who work as editors or as those who run dictionaries, language is always changing. It's always evolving. And eventually it's self-correcting. Words that were commonplace more than 100 years ago are now seen as offensive and disempowering. Whether or not they were intended that way 100 years ago or 150 years ago, today, in this moment, they are disempowering and painful. The fact that we can learn better ways to use words to make others feel loved and safe and respected, that is always a good thing. And selfishly speaking, just when we remember Boston Legal, remember that TV show way back when from the 90s? At one point, Danny Crane was told he was in cognitive decline, and so he went out and got a bunch of brain teasers, word searchers and crossword puzzles and stuff like that to make his brain more nimble. Similarly, if we are open to the ever-changing nature of contemporary language, not only does it help us to be more effective in our efforts to be loving and kind to others, but it makes our mind more nimble, which can stave off the ravages of unsustainable aging practices. Let's continue. I said practices. I should have said stave off the effects of unsustainable aging practices. And what are some of those? Recreational intoxicants are really hard on the brain. Eating a 1950s meat and potatoes diet is really hard on the brain. Insufficiency of fruits, vegetables, seeds, nuts, grains, legumes, tubers, pulses, herbs, and mushrooms. That is really hard on the brain. Drinking water that has not been subjected to reverse osmosis, oddly enough, is hard on the brain. Good old Mark Twain, as Samuel Clemens, or vice versa, once quipped that America has the finest government money can buy. And although the Food and Drug Administration began as an advocate for the people, it has become an advocate for industry. And in the name of externalizing expenses and increasing profits, they have put the American people at peril. More people die every year from the consequences of corporate greed, corporate malfeasance, than from any terror attack. In fact, if the number of people who died every year in America due to corporate malfeasance was made public, if the number of people every year who died from corporate malfeasance in America was instead killed by a foreign agent, we would use that as a pretext for war. Instead, it's swept under the carpet. So, yes, blindly trusting our government, our corrupted government, has put the cognitive health of the majority of Americans in peril. But here's the great irony. Choosing compassion, compassionate food choices, compassionate environmental choices, compassionate communication choices can help us cope with and sometimes reverse the neurological consequences of those choices. Let's skip way ahead. Let's review the mantra's meaning. Om I invoke the wish of adding money, jewel of love, and the purifying beamy lotus of letting go, supplicating with whom may love and letting go be mastered by all. Let us bring the experience of the four bases of mindfulness into the conventional path of love and letting go, where it is love that is emphasized and jealousy that is leapt over. Together, Rather than indulge our controlling tendencies with our bodies of visualization, emotion, magic, and belief, we could just recite these words of love in harmony with our breathing and allow our subconscious to do the heavy lifting. Welcome, my friends, to the lazy bastard path of enlightenment. Together. May whole minds of all beings know be as peacefully wise as the mind of a real Lord. Imagine Buddha symbolized by a Jigme one syllable zero bija mantra. And so what we're noticing is this bit right here is acting as a synopsis of this bit right here, which if we tried silently and mentally reciting during our inhalation and our exhalation would make us turn red and then blue and then tip over and wiggle funny. And now we can supercharge this concise and passive contemplation by blending it with mantra. During our inhalation, we could silently, mentally, and passively recite the italicized bit. During our exhalation, we can physically relax as best we can while striving to chant this 6-syllable mantra 8 times per breath. And yes, if this is your first time playing with this exercise, please give yourself permission to have a learning curve. Om mani me me yung, 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 om mani me me yung. Having chanted the mantra 8 times, let us kick back now. And during our inhalation, simply watch the antics of mind as it perceives, emotes, intends, reasons, recalls, and imagines, while silently and mentally we recite the demonstrative pronoun this. And during our exhalation, let us relax into mind's non-graspable nature as silently and mentally we recite the 1-syllable verb, is. May all relationships of all beings be as joyfully loving as a real or imagined Buddhist communication symbolized by the 6-syllable mantra. Why do we work with all these symbolisms? Because all complex life forms on this planet, including octopi, have evolved to think symbolically. And when us, Homo sapiens sapiens, who have the privilege of spoken language, use that language symbolically, it accelerates our spiritual growth. Om mani me me yung, 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 om mani me me yung. May all bodies of all beings know and share the beautiful health seen in Buddhist statuary, depicting the blissful body of a real or imagined Devi or Yadam archetype of enlightenment such as Chenrezig. Om mani mimi yung, 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 om mani mimi yung. May all circumstances or lots of all beings know have the good fortune or boon. As a Buddha's real or imagined paradise, pure land or Vanti. Om mani mimi yung, 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 om mani mimi yung. Oopsie, that was a little premature. Sorry, Susie, that's never happened before. Let us view letting go through a physiological lens as we bring the experience of the four bases of mindfulness into the ultimate path of love and letting go, where it is letting go that is emphasized, and it is pride that is left over. Let us sidestep the rigidity that confuses metaphors for literal statements, and relax into the flexibility that savors the chance explaining metaphors as similes. As we inhale, our circumstances, our lots could appear quite vivid. Yet as we relax into our exhalation, they could feel as no graspable or void as a real or imagined paradise or vati of light. me me yung, oh money me me yung. As we inhale, all bodies or forms could feel quite sensual. Yet as we relax into our exhalation, they could feel it as non-graspable, or it is a real or imagined octopoiedom of light. Om mani me me yung, 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 om mani me me yung. As we inhale, the interpersonal experience of communication or speech could sound quite resounding. Yet as we relax into our exhalation, it could feel it is non-graspable, or it is a real or imagined mantra of light. Om mani me me. Oopsie, I got myself all confused. Om mani me me yung, 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 om mani me me yung. As we inhale, we could notice all minds, perceptions, emotions, intentions, recollections, and imaginings quite clearly. Yet as we relax into our exhalation, they could feel as non-graspable or what is surreal or imagined, be just suitable of light. Om mani mimi yung, 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 om mani mimi yung. Let us seal this morning's practice by percussively chanting loving wishes for universal enlightenment and well-being. May all minds of all beings lucid yet void now be as enlightened as a Buddha's mind symbolized by a one-syllable bija. May all speech of all beings resounding yet void now be as loving as a Buddha's speech symbolized by a multi-syllable mantra. May all forms of all beings sensual yet void now be as healthy as a yidam archetype depicted in Buddha's statuary. May all lots of all beings appearing yet void now be as fortunate as a pure land of law depicted in Buddhist paintings. If you feel that I have earned it, you could give this live stream a thumbs up. You could even help support this channel. In approximately 9 1/3 hours, I would very much like to return to lead today's evening meditation class and group practice. And if you are as geeky as me, may the Force be with you always.